Making $1 million is extraordinarily difficult. Most people work their entire lives and never see seven figures in their bank accounts. You might think that people fortunate enough to become millionaires would protect their wealth, invest wisely, and ensure their financial security for life. Then there were these millionaires who proved that earning money and keeping money require completely different skill sets, and that the fastest way to go from rich to broke is to assume that because you have money, you understand money. Buckle up for a masterclass in how to turn millions into absolutely nothing. 1. Mike Tyson earned over $400 million during his boxing career, making him one of the highest paid athletes in history. He went completely broke by 2003, filing for bankruptcy with debts exceeding $23 million. Tyson's spending was legendary in its absurdity. He purchased 3 Bengal tigers at $70,000 each, then spent $125,000 annually just to feed them and pay a trainer to keep them from eating guests. He bought a $2 million bathtub, maintained a staff of over 200 people, and once gave a car dealership employee a $7 million tip because he liked his attitude. Tyson spent $3.4 million on clothes in a single shopping spree and maintained multiple mansions he rarely visited. When he filed for bankruptcy, Tyson said he never understood where the money went, which was precisely the problem. 2. MC Hammer earned an estimated $33 million in 1991 alone with hits like You Can't Touch This. He was broke within 5 years. Hammer maintained over 200 employees on his payroll and built a $12 million mansion featuring gold-plated gates, a baseball diamond, 2 swimming pools, a bowling alley, and a 17-car garage. The mansion cost $500,000 monthly just to maintain and staff. He owned 19 racehorses, a private jet, and jewelry that would embarrass royalty. When his music career faded, Hammer had no savings and no investments. He filed for bankruptcy in 1996, owing $13 million to creditors. Hammer later admitted he'd been surrounded by people who told him what he wanted to hear rather than what he needed to hear. 3. Nicolas Cage earned over $150 million in his film career, commanding $20 million per movie at his peak. He blew through everything and ended up owing the IRS $14 million in back taxes. Cage purchased 15 mansions simultaneously, including 2 European castles. He bought a $150,000 octopus because he thought it would help his acting, a dinosaur skull for $276,000 that was later revealed to be stolen from Mongolia, a private island, a pyramid-shaped tomb for his eventual burial, 9 Rolls-Royces, and a shark. When the housing market crashed and his career slowed, Cage had no liquid assets. He began accepting virtually any film role to pay debts, appearing in dozens of direct-to-video movies just to stay solvent. 4. Allen Iverson earned over $200 million during his NBA career, plus a lifetime Reebok contract worth $32 million. He was broke by 2012, losing his home to foreclosure. Iverson traveled with approximately 50 friends and family members who he housed, clothed, fed, and provided with cars and spending money. He bought houses for extended family, paid legal fees for friends in trouble, and handed out cash to anyone who asked. He lost millions gambling in Atlantic City casinos. When his career ended, his entourage wasn't interested in supporting him back. The lifetime Reebok deal, structured specifically to protect Iverson from himself, was the only financial decision that worked. It reportedly saved him from complete destitution. 5. Curt Schilling earned approximately $114 million playing Major League Baseball. He lost everything by investing $50 million of his own money into a video game company called 38 Studios that produced exactly 1 game before collapsing into bankruptcy. Schilling had no experience in video game development, didn't understand the industry, and ignored advisors who warned the project was underfunded. He also convinced Rhode Island to provide $75 million in loan guarantees based on job creation promises the company couldn't keep. When the company collapsed in 2012, Schilling was forced to sell his prized bloody sock from the 2004 playoffs to pay creditors. A Hall of Fame career was reduced to bankruptcy because he decided to run an industry he knew nothing about. 6. Evander Holyfield earned over $230 million across his legendary boxing career. He was completely broke by 2008, losing his 54,000 square foot Georgia mansion to foreclosure. The mansion featured 109 rooms, a bowling alley, multiple swimming pools, and cost $1 million annually just in maintenance. Holyfield fathered 11 children with 6 different women, resulting in child support obligations consuming hundreds of thousands monthly. He invested millions in ventures that produced no returns, lent money to friends who never repaid, and surrounded himself with advisors who prioritized their fees over his financial health. He was forced to return to boxing in his late 40s, fighting well past his prime because he needed money, not glory. 7. Dorothy Hamill won Olympic gold in figure skating in 1976, becoming America's sweetheart and parlaying her fame into millions. She filed for bankruptcy in 1996 after purchasing the Ice Capades touring show for $6 million, believing she could revive the struggling franchise. Hamill knew skating, but she didn't know business, and the Ice Capades was hemorrhaging money due to competition and an outdated format. She poured her personal fortune into keeping it running, taking on debt when her savings ran out. Refusing to accept the business model was broken. Within 2 years, Ice Capades collapsed entirely, taking her money with it. The Olympic champion found herself with nothing because she'd bet everything on nostalgia. 8. Scottie Pippen earned over $120 million during his NBA career playing alongside Michael Jordan. He was nearly broke multiple times due to terrible investments and trusting the wrong people. Pippen invested $2.7 million in a private jet that turned out to be worthless, requiring constant repairs before being declared fit only for scrap. He lost millions in failed real estate developments. A financial advisor he trusted embezzled millions from his accounts over several years before being caught and prosecuted. His divorce cost millions more. Despite being one of basketball's greatest players, Pippen never developed financial literacy, trusting others without verifying they were competent or honest. 9. Kim Basinger earned millions as one of Hollywood's most sought-after actresses. She nearly went bankrupt after purchasing an entire town in Georgia for $20 million, then backing out of a movie commitment that resulted in a devastating lawsuit. Basinger bought Braselton, Georgia in 1989, envisioning it as a tourist destination and film studio. The plan required massive investment she couldn't secure, forcing her to sell at substantial loss. Meanwhile, she backed out of Boxing Helena, and producers won an $8.1 million judgment against her. Unable to cover both the judgment and her real estate losses, Basinger filed for bankruptcy in 1993. An impulsive purchase and a broken commitment nearly ended her career. 10. Antoine Walker earned $110 million during his NBA career and was completely broke within 2 years of retirement, filing for bankruptcy in 2010, owing $4.3 million. Walker owned over 140 pairs of designer shoes, multiple luxury cars, and several mansions simultaneously. He bought cars for friends and family who wanted them, maintained an entourage expecting him to pay for everything, and threw lavish parties where he picked up every check. He maintained fully staffed homes in different cities that he rarely visited. When his career ended, Walker had no savings and no income. He later admitted he'd spent like the money would never stop, never imagining that NBA contracts have end dates. 11. Wesley Snipes earned tens of millions during his acting career, starring in blockbusters like the Blade franchise. He ended up serving 3 years in federal prison and owing the IRS over $17 million because he believed tax protesters who convinced him he didn't legally have to pay income taxes. Snipes fell in with advisors promoting fringe theories about taxation's illegality, convincing him to stop filing returns entirely. The IRS doesn't care about philosophical theories, and prosecutors made an example of him. Snipes spent 3 years in prison, saw his career destroyed, and emerged owing millions in penalties and interest. He lost everything because he trusted people who said he didn't have to play by normal rules. 12. Toni Braxton earned millions as one of the best-selling female R&B artists of the 1990s, winning multiple Grammy Awards. She filed for bankruptcy twice, 1998 and 2010, ultimately listing debts exceeding $50 million. Her first bankruptcy resulted partly from a contract dispute that left her earning only $172 from an album that sold millions. but subsequent troubles were self-inflicted. She maintained a lavish lifestyle even as debts mounted, spending on clothes, jewelry, and appearances while income wasn't coming. She made poor investments and trusted advisors who gave bad advice. Braxton later admitted she'd been too proud to scale back her lifestyle and too embarrassed to admit she needed help. 13. Brendan Fraser earned millions as one of Hollywood's most bankable stars in the late 1990s, starring in the Mummy franchise. He was reportedly paying $900,000 annually in alimony and child support, following his divorce, obligations based on his peak earning years that became unsustainable when his career slowed. Fraser requested a reduction in 2013, claiming he couldn't maintain payments because he was no longer earning leading man salaries. His situation illustrated a common celebrity trap. Divorce settlements based on peak income become crushing obligations when that income declines. Combined with physical injuries from performing his own stunts, Fraser found himself with obligations he couldn't meet. 14. Larry King earned millions over his decades-long career as one of America's most recognized broadcasters. Despite substantial earnings, he filed for bankruptcy in 1978, owing $352,000, and later accumulated millions in unpaid taxes and obligations from his 8 marriages to 7 different women. King's troubles stemmed partly from gambling. He loved horse racing and lost substantial sums at the track. His multiple marriages resulted in multiple divorce settlements, alimony obligations, and child support payments that cumulatively consumed his lifetime earnings. King continued working into his late 80s, partly because he loved it, but also because he needed income to meet obligations that followed him for decades. 15. Terrell Owens earned approximately $80 million during his NFL career, becoming one of the greatest wide receivers in football history. He was broke by 2012, unable to pay child support obligations to 4 different women with whom he'd fathered children. Owens maintained an expensive lifestyle featuring multiple homes, luxury cars, and an entourage expecting him to provide for them. He invested in business ventures that failed and trusted financial advisors who gave poor guidance. His child support obligations alone exceeded $40,000 monthly. He appeared on a reality show documenting athletes' financial troubles, publicly crying about his situation and admitting he'd squandered everything he'd earned through sheer carelessness. 16. Michael Vick earned over $130 million during his NFL career, including the largest contract in league history at the time. He filed for bankruptcy in 2008, listing debts of nearly $18 million. Vick's downfall came primarily from dogfighting, which resulted in prison time and lost salary. But his finances were already precarious. He'd been spending lavishly on mansions, cars, and supporting an entourage involved in the operation that sent him to prison. He'd invested in failing ventures and lent money freely. Vick eventually returned to the NFL and paid back his creditors in full, becoming an advocate for financial literacy, one of the few athletes to successfully recover from bankruptcy. 17. John McAfee made hundreds of millions founding the antivirus software company, bearing his name, becoming one of the earliest tech tycoons. He spent virtually all of it on increasingly bizarre lifestyle choices and ended up fleeing countries to avoid creditors and legal troubles. McAfee maintained a compound in Belize featuring armed guards, multiple girlfriends, and research laboratories. He invested in ambitious projects producing no returns. Legal troubles followed him across countries, including accusations of tax evasion and involvement in his neighbor's death. McAfee died in a Spanish prison cell in 2021 awaiting extradition. The man who helped secure millions of computers couldn't secure his own fortune. 18. Gary Coleman earned $100,000 per episode of Different Strokes as a child star, accumulating millions before turning 18. He was broke and working as a security guard by his 20s, having been systematically looted by his own parents and their financial advisors. Coleman's parents spent most of his earnings on themselves, taking advantage of limited legal protections for child actors. When Coleman gained access to his accounts, he discovered most was gone. He sued his parents and former advisors, winning judgments he couldn't collect because the money had been spent. Coleman died in 2010 with essentially nothing. His case contributed to stronger protections for child actors, but too late to help him. 19. Dennis Rodman earned over $27 million in NBA salary alone, plus substantial endorsement income. He has faced numerous financial troubles, including tax liens, bankruptcy filings, and inability to pay child support and alimony. Rodman's spending reflected his wild persona: constant partying, expensive jewelry, and people who helped him spend but not save. His divorces resulted in significant obligations he repeatedly failed to meet, resulting in court appearances and threats of jail time. His business ventures mostly failed, endorsement income disappeared, and erratic behavior made him unemployable. The Basketball Hall of Famer, who rebounded better than almost anyone in history, couldn't recover financially from his own excessive lifestyle. 20. Meatloaf sold over 100 million albums worldwide, including Bat Out of Hell, one of the best-selling albums ever. He filed for bankruptcy in 1983, owing $1.6 million despite massive success. His financial troubles stemmed from a disastrous business relationship with songwriter Jim Steinman that left him legally unable to use the Bat Out of Hell name or sound for years. Legal battles consumed his earnings, while he couldn't tour or record his most popular material. His voice also gave out for extended periods, limiting his ability to perform. Meatloaf eventually recovered when he reconciled with Steinman, but his bankruptcy showed how bad contracts and legal disputes can destroy even massive success. 21. Sinbad earned millions as one of the most popular comedians of the 1990s, starring in films and performing sold-out tours. He filed for bankruptcy in 2009 and again in 2013, owing over $10 million to the IRS in unpaid taxes and penalties. Sinbad's tax troubles resulted from years of failing to pay estimated quarterly taxes during his peak years, either through poor advice or neglect. The IRS assessed liability in the millions, and penalties and interest continued accumulating even as his earning power declined. Sinbad continued performing well into his 60s, partly because he loved it, but also because he needed income to address obligations that would follow him for decades. 22. Burt Reynolds was one of the biggest movie stars of the 1970s and 1980s, commanding top salaries and starring in box office hits. He filed for bankruptcy in 1996, owing over $10 million, having lost his fortune through divorce, bad investments, and expensive lifestyle that continued after his earning power declined. His divorce from Lonnie Anderson cost millions in settlement and ongoing support. He invested in restaurants and dinner theaters that all failed. He maintained expensive properties costing fortunes to operate. Reynolds spent his final years taking supporting roles in any project that would hire him, working steadily because he had no choice. 23. Stephen Baldwin earned millions as a working actor in Hollywood, appearing in films like The Usual Suspects. He filed for bankruptcy in 2009, listing debts of $2.3 million against assets of barely $1 million. Baldwin's troubles stemmed from his conversion to evangelical Christianity that alienated some Hollywood employers, real estate investments that collapsed during the 2008 crisis, and tax obligations he couldn't pay. He had accumulated multiple properties, assuming values would rise, then found himself underwater when the market crashed. His income declined as career choices limited his marketability, but obligations remained fixed. 24. Pamela Anderson earned millions from Baywatch and subsequent endorsement deals, film roles, and Playboy appearances. She has faced multiple financial troubles, including tax liens totaling over $1 million and unpaid construction bills resulting in liens against her property. Anderson reportedly fell behind on taxes during periods when income declined, but spending didn't, creating obligations that accumulated penalties and interest. She maintained expensive Malibu homes costing fortunes to sustain, invested in ventures that didn't pay off, and went through divorces consuming substantial resources. Her financial situation has varied over years, reflecting the unpredictable income pattern of celebrity. 25. Jose Canseco earned over $45 million playing Major League Baseball, becoming one of the sport's biggest stars. He has faced bankruptcy, lost homes to foreclosure, and spent years struggling financially despite substantial earnings. Canseco's troubles stemmed from divorce settlements, child support obligations, bad investments, and lifestyle expectations that came with stardom. He maintained expensive homes, cars, and an entourage even as his career ended. His post-baseball income sources have included celebrity boxing and autograph signings. Canseco has been remarkably honest about his mistakes, publicly discussing how he squandered earnings and warning other athletes to learn from his example. 26. Warren Sapp earned over $82 million during his NFL career, becoming one of the greatest defensive tackles in football history. He filed for bankruptcy in 2012, listing debts of $6.7 million. Sapp's troubles included multiple homes he couldn't sell in the collapsed real estate market, support obligations to multiple women with whom he'd fathered children, and a lifestyle requiring constant income. He owned 240 pairs of shoes and spent lavishly on entertainment. When his television analyst's salary couldn't cover obligations, Sapp had no savings. The Hall of Famer spent as if money would never stop, then discovered it had stopped. 27. Dane Cook was one of the highest-paid comedians in America, selling out arenas and earning millions from touring and film appearances. He lost an estimated $12 million when his half-brother and business manager Daryl McCauley embezzled from him over several years. McCauley had complete control over Cook's finances and used that access to transfer millions to his own accounts. Cook trusted his brother completely and never verified what was happening until the theft became too large to hide. McCauley was eventually caught, prosecuted, and sentenced to prison, but the money was largely gone. Cook's case illustrates the danger of trusting family members with complete financial control. 28. Gary Busey earned millions during his film career, receiving an Academy Award nomination for The Buddy Holly Story. He filed for bankruptcy in 2012, listing debts exceeding $500,000 against assets of just $26,000. Busey's troubles included unpaid taxes, medical bills from a motorcycle accident that nearly killed him and caused lasting brain damage, and a lifestyle that continued despite declining income. His erratic behavior, partially attributed to brain injury, made him increasingly difficult to work with and reduced employment options. Busey has relied on reality television appearances and cult celebrity status to generate income in later years, a far cry from his leading man peak. 29. Dionne Warwick sold over 100 million records during her legendary career, winning multiple Grammy Awards. She filed for bankruptcy in 2013, owing over $10 million primarily to the IRS in unpaid taxes and penalties. Warwick's tax troubles accumulated over decades, with the IRS assessing liability for years when she failed to pay what she owed. Penalties and interest compounded the original debt until it exceeded what she could ever realistically pay. Warwick continued performing into her 80s, partly because she loved it, but also because she needed income to address obligations that would follow her for the rest of her life. 30. Thomas Jefferson, one of America's founding fathers and author of the Declaration of Independence, died so deeply in debt that his heirs sold Monticello and his enslaved workers to pay creditors. Jefferson earned substantial income from his legal practice, political positions, and plantation, but spent lavishly on books, wine, art, and architecture. He continuously expanded Monticello despite lacking funds. His presidency cost him money rather than earning it. He died owing over $100,000, equivalent to millions today, and his estate sale couldn't cover all debts. The man who wrote "All men are created equal" left his family nothing but bills. 31. Mark Twain earned millions from his writing, becoming one of the most successful authors in American history. He lost everything by investing heavily in a mechanical typesetting machine called the Page Compositor that was supposed to revolutionize printing. Twain poured $300,000, equivalent to millions today, into development over more than a decade, convinced it would make him richer than writing ever could. The machine was too complicated and unreliable to succeed, and Twain's investment was lost entirely. He was forced to declare bankruptcy and spent years on exhausting worldwide lecture tours to pay back creditors, demonstrating character if not business judgment. 32. Oscar Wilde was one of the most successful and highly paid writers of his era, commanding substantial fees for his plays. He died penniless in a cheap Paris hotel room after imprisonment for gross indecency destroyed his career and reputation. Wilde had never saved during his successful years, spending everything on expensive dinners, champagne, gifts, and maintaining an artist's lifestyle. When scandal struck and he lost everything, he had no resources to fall back on. His final years were spent in impoverished exile, dependent on charity. Wilde's fate demonstrated that success without savings is precarious, and reputations can be destroyed faster than they're built. 33. Lenny Dykstra earned over $36 million playing Major League Baseball and briefly appeared successful as a businessman after retirement, publishing a financial newsletter and appearing as an investment expert. He was actually losing money constantly and ended up filing for bankruptcy, owing between $10 and $50 million. Dykstra's post-baseball ventures were largely fraudulent. He was convicted of bankruptcy fraud, concealing assets, and money laundering. He bought a mansion for $18 million using money he didn't have and lied to everyone about his finances. Dykstra served prison time and emerged with nothing. His case went beyond overspending into actual criminal fraud. 34. Johnny Depp earned over $650 million during his career, becoming one of Hollywood's highest-paid actors. He reportedly spent nearly all of it, facing lawsuits from former managers who alleged he was spending $2 million monthly. According to court documents, Depp spent $75 million on homes, $18 million on a yacht he rarely used, maintained a 40-person staff, and spent over $30,000 monthly on wine alone. He spent tens of millions on memorabilia, art, and collectibles. Whether blamed on his choices or managers' failures, Depp's situation demonstrated that even earning hundreds of millions provides no protection against spending hundreds of millions plus $1. 35. Lisa Marie Presley inherited Elvis Presley's estate, worth approximately $100 million, when she gained full control at age 25. She was reportedly worth only about $14,000 at her death in 2023. Presley's troubles included multiple divorces consuming substantial assets, business managers who allegedly mishandled her money, and investments that lost value. Her lawsuit against her former manager revealed that decisions made on her behalf had decimated her portfolio. She also spent freely maintaining properties and lifestyle appropriate to Elvis's daughter, if not her actual bank balance. One of America's largest inheritances reduced to nothing within 3 decades. 36. Curtis 50 Cent. Jackson earned an estimated $260 million from music, touring, and his investment in Vitamin Water, which netted him over $100 million alone when Coca-Cola purchased the company in one of the most successful celebrity investments ever. He filed for bankruptcy in 2015, listing debts of $36 million against assets he claimed were substantially lower than public perception suggested. His bankruptcy was partly strategic. He filed after losing a lawsuit requiring him to pay $7 million for releasing a woman's sex tape without her consent. But it also revealed spending that had consumed much of his fortune despite his business success. He maintained a 52-room Connecticut mansion that cost a fortune to operate and keep staffed, collected expensive cars, and spent freely on jewelry and entertainment. His bankruptcy filing revealed the substantial gap between his public image of unlimited wealth and his actual financial situation. 50 Cent has since recovered and continues earning through various business ventures, but his bankruptcy demonstrated that even massive investment windfalls can disappear through spending, legal problems, and poor ongoing decisions. 37. Ulysses S. Grant, the Civil War general who saved the Union and later served as President of the United States, died nearly broke after losing his life savings in a Ponzi scheme run by someone he trusted completely. After his presidency, Grant invested his entire fortune with a financial firm run by Ferdinand Ward, who promised exceptional returns that seemed too good to be true because they were. Ward was actually running a classic fraud, using new investor money to pay fake returns to earlier investors while skimming enormous amounts for himself. When the scheme inevitably collapsed in 1884, Grant lost everything over $100,000 in savings, equivalent to millions in today's dollars. Grant was so broke he had to borrow money from friends to pay basic household expenses. He spent his final months racing to complete his memoirs before cancer killed him, hoping desperately that book sales would provide for his wife after his death. The memoirs were indeed a success, earning his family nearly $450,000. But Grant himself died essentially penniless because he trusted a con man with everything he had worked his entire life to accumulate. 38. Michael Jackson earned billions during his career as the king of pop, selling more albums than almost any artist in history and commanding unprecedented fees for tours and appearances. At his death in 2009, he was reportedly $500 million in debt, owing money to everyone from concert promoters to his own lawyers. Jackson's spending was legendary, even by celebrity standards. Neverland Ranch cost approximately $5 million annually just to operate and maintain. And his shopping sprees sometimes totaled millions in single trips to antique stores and auction houses. He bought art, antiques, and collectibles compulsively without tracking expenditures. His legal troubles, including defending against molestation charges through multiple trials, cost tens of millions in legal fees. Jackson borrowed against future earnings repeatedly, using his valuable music catalog ownership as collateral, until he owed more than he could ever realistically earn in his lifetime. His death actually saved his estate financially. Posthumous earnings from his music have paid off all his debts and generated billions for his heirs. But Jackson himself died drowning in obligations he couldn't meet, the highest paid entertainer in history who somehow managed to spend even more than he earned. 39. Ed McMahon earned millions as Johnny Carson's sidekick on The Tonight Show for 30 years, becoming one of television's most recognizable faces and voices through decades of consistent work. He faced foreclosure on his Beverly Hills mansion in 2008 after falling nearly $650,000 behind on mortgage payments despite his long career. McMahon blamed a combination of factors, including neck injuries, that limited his ability to work in his later years, the writers' strike that eliminated television income for extended periods, and an adjustable rate mortgage whose payments increased beyond what he could afford when rates reset. He had also spent lavishly during his earning years without building adequate savings for retirement, assuming the work would continue indefinitely. McMahon's situation became embarrassingly public when he appeared on television pleading for someone to help him. Friends, including Donald Trump, offered assistance, and McMahon eventually avoided foreclosure. But his public financial humiliation demonstrated that even decades of television success and apparent prosperity provide no guarantee of financial security when retirement comes. 40. Willie Nelson owed the IRS over $16 million in back taxes in 1990, forcing him to release an unusual album called The IRS Tapes: Who Will Buy My Memories, specifically to pay his overwhelming debt. Nelson's tax troubles resulted from bad advice from accountants who had invested his money in aggressive tax shelters that the IRS later disallowed entirely, creating liability for years of back taxes plus substantial penalties and interest. Nelson himself hadn't understood what his advisors were doing with his money, trusting them to handle all financial matters while he focused exclusively on music and touring. When the massive tax bill came due all at once, Nelson had neither the cash to pay it nor assets he could easily liquidate quickly. The IRS seized and auctioned his belongings, including his home, instruments, and personal possessions. Loyal fans bought many items at auction and donated them back to Nelson in a touching display of support. His debt was eventually settled for less than the full amount owed, but the experience demonstrated how trusting the wrong financial advisors can create problems that take decades to fully resolve. 41. Marvin Gaye, one of Motown's greatest artists and the voice behind timeless classics, declared bankruptcy in 1976, owing nearly $7 million, despite his massive record sales and cultural impact. Gaye's troubles stemmed from a brutal divorce from his first wife, Anna Gordy, sister of Motown founder Berry Gordy, that required him to pay her royalties from his next album as part of the settlement, an album he deliberately made unapproachable to minimize her payment. He also owed substantial back taxes accumulated over years of poor financial management, and had spent freely during his successful years without saving for leaner times ahead. Gaye fled to Europe to escape his creditors and the IRS, spending years living abroad in various countries while struggling financially and battling personal demons. His comeback album Midnight Love, featuring the hit Sexual Healing, briefly restored his commercial fortunes and seemed to signal a renaissance, but he was shot and killed by his own father in 1984 before he could rebuild his wealth. The voice of a generation died essentially broke because he'd never learned to manage the money his voice earned him. 42. Cyndi Lauper earned millions from Girls Just Want to Have Fun and her subsequent albums in the 1980s, becoming one of the decade's most distinctive and successful pop stars. She lost most of her early earnings to her manager, who embezzled from her systematically while she was focused on music and completely unaware of the theft. Lauper was so focused on her creative work that she paid no attention to business matters whatsoever, trusting her manager with complete and unverified financial control over her earnings and investments. By the time she discovered the extent of the theft, most of the money was gone and couldn't be recovered through legal action because it had already been spent. Lauper had to rebuild her career and her finances completely from scratch, learning painful lessons about trusting people with your money and the necessity of financial oversight. She eventually recovered and has been more careful about financial oversight since then, but her early wealth disappeared entirely because she delegated complete financial responsibility to someone who betrayed that trust without any verification or accountability. 43. Francis Ford Coppola, director of the Godfather trilogy and one of the most celebrated filmmakers in cinema history, was nearly $100 million in debt in the late 1980s after a series of expensive, ambitious films that failed catastrophically at the box office. Coppola had invested his own money in projects like One from the Heart, which cost $27 million to produce and earned barely $600,000 at the box office, one of the biggest flops in Hollywood history. He owned Zoetrope Studios, which hemorrhaged money consistently and eventually had to be sold to pay creditors. His debt consumed his earnings for years afterward, forcing him to take directing jobs on films he wasn't passionate about, purely to pay back what he owed. Coppola eventually recovered financially through his successful wine business in Napa Valley, and by directing more commercial projects that generated steady income. But his near bankruptcy demonstrated powerfully that even artistic genius and past success provide absolutely no protection against financial overreach when ambition exceeds resources. 44. MC Hammer's financial advisor attempted to warn him that his spending was completely unsustainable, reportedly telling Hammer directly that he needed to cut expenses immediately and drastically or face certain bankruptcy within a few years. Hammer fired the advisor and hired someone who told him what he wanted to hear instead, that everything was fine and he could continue spending as he pleased. This pattern, ignoring financial warnings from honest advisors and surrounding yourself with yes men who reinforce your delusions, appears repeatedly in virtually every story of millionaires who went broke. Hammer later admitted publicly that firing that honest advisor was his single biggest mistake, saying that he'd wanted desperately to believe his success would last forever and had rejected anyone who suggested otherwise as being negative or unsupportive. The financial advisor who tried to save Hammer from himself was rewarded for his honesty with termination, while Hammer continued spending recklessly until there was literally nothing left to spend. The advisor was right, and Hammer paid the price for not listening. 45. And finally, the pattern connecting almost every story. Millionaires who went broke shared fundamental mistakes. They surrounded themselves with yes men instead of honest advisors. They trusted others with financial control without verification. They spent based on current income without planning for decline. They invested in things they didn't understand. They confused earning money with understanding money. They maintained lifestyles requiring constant income with no margin for error. They were generous to people who disappeared when money ran out. They believed success was permanent. The difference between millionaires who stay wealthy and those who go broke isn't how much they earn. It's whether they understand that earning and keeping require different skills. Here's the brutal truth about wealth. Making money and keeping money are completely different skills, and excellence at one provides no guarantee of competence at the other. These millionaires proved you can earn more in a year than most people earn in a lifetime and still end up with nothing. That financial success requires financial literacy, and that the most dangerous assumption is that money will keep coming forever. The real fortune was the financial discipline they never developed along the way. Every bankruptcy, every foreclosure, every IRS seizure represents someone who earned more than enough to be comfortable for life, but spent, invested, or was defrauded out of everything. History's lesson is clear. If you ever become wealthy, live below your means, verify what advisors are doing with your money, plan for income to decrease, and remember that people surrounding you during good times often disappear during bad ones. Most importantly, understand that having money doesn't mean you understand money. Subscribe if you want to keep your money longer than these millionaires kept theirs, and remember that financial security isn't about how much you earn. It's about how much you keep and whether you're prepared for the day when the income stops coming.